Today we have a case presentation that is going to be jointly presented by one of our hub panelists, Kathleen Karamy and Farah Sagoda, who is a BCBA intern. And they're going to be doing a really interesting case. It's a continuation from last clinic on mandated reporting, and they will be discussing a case with a family who has several treatment barriers, and we'll be bringing the case to the panel and participants to discuss how we can identify those treatment barriers and then address those barriers to help promote the best outcomes for the child and improve the quality of life for the family. So let's go ahead and move on to our didactic presentation. It is Dr. Susan Copeland. Her primary research focuses are on developing strategies that allow individuals with disabilities to provide their own supports, direct their own lives, and enhance active participation in their families, schools, and communities. Her research has examined reading literacy instruction for students with severe disabilities and self-management instruction for individuals with autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disabilities, and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Dr. Susan Copeland also teaches literacy instruction for individuals with severe disabilities, single case research design, advocacy and empowerment for individuals with extensive support needs, applied behavior analysis, and history and current understanding of intellectual disability. So we are very excited to have you here presenting for us today, and she's going to be presenting on self-management and transition, strategies to facilitate employment and post-secondary success. So welcome.
Thank you. It's going to take me just a second to get going here, I think.
Absolutely. Take your time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for letting me present today. This is one of my favorite topics. And because of that, I am using a self-management app called a Timer so that I will not keep you here all day, because I love this topic and I feel really passionate that this is something that is so effective and so useful and so underused. So I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you a little bit about that today. It's my understanding that there's already been a didactic on self-management, so I'm going to kind of go fairly quickly through some parts of this and then really try to focus in on how we can actually use this in transition. But just as a quick review, self-management is when we are prompting or modifying or monitoring our own behavior. So it's really any process that a person uses to influence their behavior, the specific skills or strategies that we use to control our own actions. And there are several different kinds of strategies, but it's most common that we put strategies together and create packages. And it's also important to keep in mind that these are not strategies that we use for acquisition. These are strategies that we use when an individual knows how to perform a task but is either not responding to the SD or is not responding to the reinforcement consistently. And so we use these strategies when we want to establish fluency or maintenance or even generalization of a behavior. And just quickly to remind you, self-management can be used across the age span, and I'm really going to talk today about how we might be able to use it in transition. And what you see now is a slide that just reminds us of what IDEA's definition of transition is. So when I talk about transition today, I'm talking about transitioning from school to community work, adulthood, essentially. And when we are teaching transition, I notice there are a few people in the audience today who are working in school systems. When we teach transition, we have to think about teaching skills, both academic sorts of skills, but also vocational skills, as well as social skills and some of the independent living skills. So when we think about, well, what populations benefit from self-management instruction, and truly we all benefit from self-management instruction. Think for a minute how many self-management tools you probably use in your work life or in your leisure life or in your just in your home life. there's a long history of research that has documented effective outcomes of using self-management instruction with young children, with youth, with adults with a range of disabilities and across settings and behaviors. And that's one of the nice things about self-management strategies is they're very flexible procedures. They can be individualized for a person's cognitive or communication abilities. And because of that, they're really useful across the populations that you may be working with. So why should we use self-management strategies? Because as we'll talk about later, they do require some time on the front end. So why should we decide that we're going to put our efforts with a client or with a student on teaching self-management? Well, one of the biggest reasons is that self-management strategies decrease reliance on external prompts and reinforcement. So they allow an individual to actually be in control of their own behavior performance, and they assist us in transferring the stimulus control from staff or parents to the person, to the system that the person is using. And we can't be there as BCBAs or as parents or teachers or whatever. We can't be with someone 24 hours a day. And so we might actually miss occurrences of a behavior. So that's a missed opportunity to reinforce a behavior or to provide corrective feedback, etc. So by providing instruction to people to be able to monitor their own behavior, we're really increasing the strength of the intervention that we're using. And then finally, one of the big reasons to use self-management strategies is they facilitate maintenance and generalization. And when we look at the research literature and when we look at practice, what we so often see is that people are taught skills, they're taught to acquire skills, they're brought to fluency perhaps, but there is not sustained efforts to help them generalize. And that's really what we want, right? We want our clients, our students to be able to use behaviors throughout their lives, not just in the settings where we are present with them. And to me, that's one of the absolute strongest reasons that we should be using self-management. And here's just a list of all the different kinds of self-management strategies. Again, because you've already had the opportunity to look at these before, I'm not going to go into great depth on each one of them, but I am going to show you some ways that we can think about using those in transition. And so just as a quick overview, when we think about transition, again, we're really thinking about multiple kinds of skill areas where people need to acquire skills and need to be able to use them independently. And you may not have thought about health-related skills, but that's a critical part of transitioning from school to adulthood if someone's going to be able to live on their own more independently. So there are lots of ways that self-management's being used to build health-related skills, leisure activities like exercise, social interactions. Those are key for successful transition. Daily living skills, certainly numerous ways that self-management's being used to build those skills. Continuing academic skills, and then also employment skills. And today, because of our limited time, I am going to really just focus this rest of our discussion around employment. And the reason I'm doing that is that we all know that employment outcomes for individuals with disabilities are very, very poor. For example, only about 45.3% of young adults with autism reported having a paid job when they participated in the National Transition Longitudinal Survey. And that compares to about 71% of their peers without disabilities. And that's not okay. What we know, though, from research is that typically people with disabilities are not hired, or they don't lose their jobs because they can't perform the work task. It's other things, other kinds of skills that often results in termination. So one way we can use self-management is to help people take skills that they know how to do, but do them consistently without a lot of external prompting, and that can help them maintain their jobs, which is just crucial. So here are just some quick examples of ways that you might think about using self-management instruction on the job with someone that you're working with, either a high school student who is in transition, or a post-secondary student, or someone who's actually out already in the community. So one example is, of course, to use a self-management system to remember task steps or task sequences. I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. And you may not have thought about this, but self-management is also very effective in improving social skills that are needed for the workplace. So how to accept critical feedback, to ask for help, to seek attention appropriately. These are the kinds of skills that get people in trouble and may result in termination if they don't have a way to do this effectively. Completing tasks on time and being able to stay focused during work time. In schools, I think, unfortunately, that we often over-prompt people and we never fade a lot of those prompts, and so our students may not really have developed the ability to persist on tasks, and that's something that is very much needed in the workplace. So when we think about those self-management strategies, one example of using self-management is using antecedent cue regulation and self-monitoring, and those are often packaged together. So that might be something like using a checklist or a visual task analysis or even audio prompting, along with having the individual record the occurrence or non-occurrence of whatever the behavior is that they are working on. So here, for example, is a simple tool that has been used to help someone with a janitorial task. So it's a visual task analysis. It has the picture and it has the text as well. The person can use the visual cues to prompt them to do each task. They check it off as they go, the self-monitoring and self-recording feature. And then if you look at the bottom, they have set a goal for how many tasks they would be able to complete independently. And they, at the end, they have monitored or self-evaluated their performance, and they have determined whether or not they met their goal, and then they can self-reinforce, or they can recruit reinforcement from somebody else. Now that's kind of old school, simple, easy to use, but I want to point out, there are literally hundreds of self-management applications, some of them very specific, like iPrompts, developed specifically for individuals with ASD or other disabilities. But there are also a lot of generic apps on most of our smartphones or our iPads, things like audio files or timers, ways that we can incorporate self-management into somebody's job placement very easily and do so in a really socially valid kind of way, which I think is always important, because we want, especially in the workplace, not to use a system that makes someone stand out so much that it interferes with their ability to integrate into the setting. Goal setting and self-evaluation are also important parts of self-management. They can be used to set a production goal, like we saw in the last slide, or even a social goal. So you might have somebody whose job is to do filing in a medical office. So they might set a goal to file 30 documents. Or you've got another person whose job supervisor has perhaps indicated that they are having some difficulty with interpersonal skills. So maybe their goal is just to greet 5 coworkers every day. So you set up your system, you have the person self-monitor and self-record, and then they evaluate their performance against the criteria and either reinforce themselves or recruit reinforcement from a supervisor or a coworker. And again, there's simple ways to do this. Don't break the chain is a strategy that's been around forever. You can do that with a calendar, but they now make a very simple, easy-to-use app that you can put on a phone or an iPad that somebody can use, and it provides the individual with a visual way, a concrete way to understand whether they have they've performed their behavior and met their goal, and then they can reinforce them. I do want to spend just a couple of minutes on self-instruction because it's a very underused strategy, and it's very flexible. When we think about it, we are not going to be present with our clients or students for the rest of their lives. Nobody is except that person. So any skills that we can teach them to use that they will carry with them are going to be helpful to them. And self-instruction involves saying to yourself either instructions on how to do a task or respond to a situation. And I've seen this used even with individuals with very significant cognitive disability who had somewhat limited language but could be taught to say something to themselves, sub-vocalize something that would prompt them to initiate a task or to initiate a social skill. And self-instruction can be used in lots of different ways. One very useful way to use it in the job market or in the job world is in problem solving. One of the skills that sometimes people with disabilities don't always use is when they encounter a problem at work, be it social or be it related to a job task, they don't know how to solve the problem. They haven't been taught that. So there's quite a solid body of literature showing that we can teach individuals to identify a problem, identify a solution, perform the task, evaluate their response, and then self-reinforce. So the example I put up is one probably pretty familiar to you if you have worked with people in employment settings. When there's an issue that comes up where someone is going to have to work with a supervisor that is not their preference, and that can create a meltdown and could lead to job termination. But we can take these simple problem-solving steps and teach someone a script, essentially, or a series of prompts that they tell themselves, and they can work through the problem and then be able to solve that problem and go on. There's also a self-instruction technique called Did Next Now that can be useful in regards to actually creating and following through on job tasks. And in self-instruction, what we typically do is teach someone to say the strategy out loud and then gradually to begin to say it, to whisper it, and then to actually say it in their head. And as I said, I've actually seen this done and used this with people with significant cognitive disabilities. So don't just think, oh, my client can't use this, because they may actually be able to do that. Okay, well, let's talk in the time that we have left about how do we teach self-management in the job setting. So the first step is always, what is the problem? We have to determine why the person isn't being successful, and is self-management an effective strategy. So we would want to do things like consider the function of the behavior. If the reason the person isn't successful is that they don't know how to do the tasks, then we need to use something besides self-management. But if they know how to do the task, but they are not doing the task, or they know how to perform the social skill, they're not using it, then self-management might be appropriate. So we want to define the behavior, decide how we're going to measure it, and then we want to select a self-management strategy and materials that are individualized for the person. Self-management is not, these strategies are not disability specific. So you want to think about what is the person's communication and cognitive skill level? What's the job task? What's the setting like? What would be acceptable in that setting? And target those things as you're building the system. And then this is the part where people, I think, the staff may sometimes kind of give up. But this is crucial. We have to actually teach it, and we have to teach self-management just like we would teach any other skill that we are building in someone's repertoire. So the first thing to do is to sit down and provide a rationale. Why do we need to do this? Help the person understand what the problem is and why it's a problem. Is it because you're not producing as much as you need to? Or is it because you're having a meltdown every Friday and that disrupts work? So what's the problem? And once we've provided the rationale and we've gotten the person on board with this, then we actually begin the teaching. And it's crucial that we do very systematic direct instruction. So we model what's the problem behavior, what are examples, what are non-examples, what's the behavior that we want them to use, examples, non-examples. We take turn role-playing. Then we begin to build how do we self-monitor or self-instruct or whatever the strategy is we're using. And again, we model, we role-play, we use guided practice to teach the individual to actually use that strategy. We reinforce the correct, accurate use of the strategy. We provide corrective feedback. And then once the person has mastered it, we begin to fade the assistance. So fade the prompts, increase the time, the length of time that the person is using the strategy without assistance. And then we monitor periodically and adjust as needed. And if you feel like someone is not being accurate, you can build in a matching phase where you have them collect data on their own behavior, self-monitor, whatever your system is, and you collect data, and then they're reinforced if their data and your data match. My experience has been that people that I've worked with have been extremely honest about their monitoring their behavior, recording their behavior, and it really hasn't been a problem, but that is an option if need be. And just real quickly, I'll end today just giving you an example from a study that I did a few years ago. Charles was a high school student with autism who was doing an unpaid internship, and he was a great guy in many, many ways, and he knew how to do what they were asking him to do, but he would not initiate tasks and he would not complete tasks. So it required one-on-one assistance, even though he knew how to do the task. And the task involved cleaning the staff dining room. And that meant he needed to clean off tables, wipe down tables, put chairs back, several things. He had 10 task steps, and then he had to repeat those for all the tables that were in the staff dining room. And what we did was to create a simple self-management packet for him. He didn't speak. He didn't have literacy skills. And as I said, he would get stuck. So what we did was we took a picture of him actually performing each step of the task. We used actual photos, and we put one photo per page. And we taught him to touch the picture, complete the task, turn the page. Touch the next picture, complete the task, turn the page. What we realized in this study was that just touching the picture, just seeing the picture was not sufficient for him. He needed something that sort of marked for him, I think, that it was done. So he would touch the picture, that prompted him to initiate the task, and then he would turn the page, and that cued him to go on to the next picture, the next task. And this is some of the data that we collected from that project. His data were pretty variable. What you're seeing now on the top here is, in the open circles, is his task initiation, independent task initiation. And then the diamonds are the prompts that were required. And so you'll see that once we started with the system, his ability to initiate did increase, and the number of prompts, of course, decreased significantly. And then on this page, it's task completion. And it wasn't perfect. I would love to go back and tweak this again, but research doesn't always allow you to do that. But he did improve significantly, and he was very, very proud of himself. And the staff at the school were also very pleased with his increased ability to be independent. So just leave you with this. Self-management instruction does take more time on the front end. There is absolutely no way around that. But it does work. And in the long run, it will save time. And I think most importantly, it really leaves our clients, our students, with skills that they can use for the rest of their life. This is not something that they'll use once and then maybe never use again, but this is something we can build on and build their independence, build their success. And when we think about what do we want for students as they transition to adulthood, we want them to be as independent as possible. And self-management strategies are one way to do that. I've included in the PowerPoint a couple of pages of resources for you, a book, and then some other websites, and then some apps that might be helpful to you if you're not already familiar with those apps. But if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and thank you all for letting me share this with you today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your presentation today, and we do have time for questions from participants in the audience or from the panelists. So if you have another few moments, Dr. Copeland. Okay, perfect. So we can go ahead and open it up for questions. If you have any, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions now.
Hi, Dr. Copeland. This is Zoe Miguel in Santa Fe. First, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to share this information with all of us. I think it is a wonderful reminder of how strategies of self-management can make a tremendous difference in people's lives. I guess I have a comment rather than a question, and I hope that's okay. I work with much younger children, so I work in general with children under the age of 5. And I just want to stress that a lot of these, as you said, can be built into programs very early on, so that these become lifelong skills for a child. Again, I mean, I have 2 young boys. These are helpful strategies for them. And so I think that's a wonderful thing to remember, that not to wait until it's time for transition and going out into the workforce. And I just wanted to share a wonderful example real quickly. I had a little girl who loved Frozen, and when she got angry, she would sing very loudly, "Let it go," right? So she'd go, "Let it go." And obviously this was wonderful and non-functional in some environments. And so we taught her to use that as a self-management skill, but to do it quieter and quieter until it was self-talk in her head. So every time she would get mad, you could just see her singing, "Let it go, let it go." Anyway, so just again, thank you so much for the time, for your time coming and talking with us about these strategies. I really appreciate it.
Well, that's a great example of self-instruction. And I want to underscore what you said. I started out working with adults in the community and was using self-management strategies with people that were living on their own and for the first time, or having a job for the first time. And what brought me back into the school system, into working with younger kids, is exactly what you said. I realized, wow, if they had learned this in kindergarten, adulthood would be a piece of cake. So I agree, the younger the better.
Wonderful. Did we have another question? I thought I saw somebody else that maybe potentially had one. Dr. Copeland, I was wondering if maybe you could take a moment to share any resources that a BCBA, maybe working with the family in the home setting, might be able to reach out to or access when they are looking at helping develop some self-management skills for transitions. And also related to that too, I believe that there is a transitions school type setting in Roswell, New Mexico, and I was curious if you had any work or relationships with them, and if so, if you could describe the work that they do there.
First of all, in terms of resources, I think that Some of the resources that I included in the PowerPoint will certainly be available to people. But I think when you're, and in fact, we are in the middle of. We just recently finished 2 projects and are getting ready to start a 3rd, working with families. And I think in terms of doing this with families, it's so important to find out what is acceptable and doable with that family, and make it as simple as it can be. I love the technology and would love to have everybody having their own iPads and doing all this stuff, but we found out pretty quickly that some families don't allow screen time, for example. So we need to make it something that will work for families, and it is a wonderful thing when families can use self-management with their children, because it does help the parents significantly and it helps the child. So I would just say, in terms of what we're finding out, make it simple and match it to the child and the family's situation, and think outside the box. It doesn't have to be electronic. It can be something super simple that you just put together, a visual task analysis for the child. You laminate it, you give them a marker, and they're good to go. They wipe it off, they use it the next day. Simple, simple, simple works. And I'm not sure if I'm thinking of the same, your second question about Roswell. Are you talking about the post-secondary program there?
Potentially. Unfortunately, I don't have too much information about the service that they have there, but I remember hearing about it a while back and recalling that it was a unique opportunity.
Yeah, Eastern New Mexico has a 1-year program, a post-secondary program for individuals with disabilities, and there are different tracks that they can take, that they can study. I think it's everything from childcare to, I don't know, a lot of other things. I actually heard about it before I moved to New Mexico because it was pretty unique. And many people know Tim Harris, who had Tim's Place, and Tim went to school there for, Tim sort of did it, Tim is a very goal-oriented person, and he kind of helped them create a curriculum for him. But it is a wonderful opportunity and would be a great place to implement self-management, that's for sure. And so I have friends who have sent their children there, but I don't have a professional relationship with them.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and I think that one of the goals for ECHO is to be able to help educate our local community of the resources in New Mexico, and so I think that this is a great opportunity for us to learn a little bit more about that program.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Copeland, thank you again for taking the time to join us today. It was a wonderful presentation, and I think we're all walking away with a lot of information, so thank you. All right. So we are going to move on to the next part of our ECHO Clinic today, our case presentation. So just as a reminder, all of our case presentations are HIPAA compliant, so we will not be sharing any identifying patient information during the presentation. And we do have 2 different types of case presentations. One that is a case presentation primarily for consultation, which is the presentation for today. And we will start off with Kathleen describing the case, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience and then move into recommendations thereafter. So Haley, do you mind sharing the case presentation form? And Kathleen, you can feel free to begin whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for joining. We're very much looking forward to your contributions. I'll start off by just saying this is a fairly complex case in that there are multiple children involved, and so I'll do my best to present in an organized fashion. And we also have Denise Weaver, who's the supervising BCBA, on the call, and Farah, who's our registered behavior technician and also an intern at BCI. So they will be able to address questions as well as they're working to directly serve the family. So this is a family that we've been working with for approximately 18 months. The family lives in New Mexico. The father works full-time in the military and the mother stays at home. They have 5 children together. We're currently providing services to 2 of the 5 children, ages 7 and 5. There are a total of 2 children under the age of 5 in the family, and the youngest child, age 2.5, just received a diagnosis of autism as well. So we expect that we'll be starting ABA for that child as well in the future. We would like to present the case today due to multiple concerns specifically related to treatment barriers. Most recently, we've been working with the Child Protective Services in New Mexico after a string of incidents that occurred that we felt may jeopardize the health and safety of the children in the home. What's been challenging is many of these incidents in isolation can be easily explained, but I think together paint a very different picture. And so we'll, of course, talk through all of this. The primary language in the home is English. The family parents are married. In addition to ABA, so we're serving the child age 5 and child age 7 who receive 27 and 20 hours of ABA respectively. They also receive occupational therapy both 1 time a week for 30 minutes. And the incident that required us to involve Child Protective Services was there was at least 2 incidents of wandering that occurred recently where the children were outside of the house. The parents did not know that they were outside and they were actually wandering around unsupervised. In addition to this, there was an incident where the technician was in the home providing therapy, heard a loud crash in one of the bedrooms. The technician ran to see what had happened, and one of the smaller children had pulled down a very large and heavy dresser. The child was unharmed, but what was notable in the situation is that the mother was in the home, heard the crash, and did not respond. And so the technician actually went downstairs to talk with the mother about what had occurred. And the mother responded pretty nonchalantly, did not express concern, and indicated that she did hear the crash and was wondering what had happened. But again, she did not respond. There were several other incidents. So for example, one of the children fell into the closet and broke an arm. The children were also using a baby pool as drinking water for a period of time, and one of the children had a bowel movement in the pool. The other children continued to drink out of the baby pool, and it resulted in illness experienced by multiple children, so vomiting and diarrhea. In addition, there was an incident where one of the children put a blanket into the oven. The mom did not know that the blanket was in the oven, turned the oven on to preheat, and the blanket started on fire. So there has been, of course, just a series of incidents that have occurred impacting all children. The parents historically have made environmental modifications such as putting additional locks or alarms on the doors. Those are used initially and not implemented as time moves forward. So even after these environmental mods, the children were still found outside wandering, including the baby, who's age 2.5. So the clinical team has approached the family on multiple occasions, expressing concern, recommending additional supports such as respite, additional caregiving supports, and the family has responded rather defensively. Sometimes they verbalize that they don't require the additional supports. Other times the mom has laughed about the incidents, and it's the impression of the clinical team that the family is not seeing the same level of severity as we're perceiving from these incidents. So would love some recommendations around additional supports for the family, and also how to continue to express our concerns and discuss potential recommendations. In addition, would love some recommendations around education. All school-age children have been homeschooled up until this point. They have not been interested in the local public school system, and so they actually identified a private school for the school-age boys to enter into this fall. The clinician on the case had the opportunity to sit with the principal at the private school and review the results of the VB-MAP. As a result of this meeting, the school determined that it was not an appropriate setting for the 5-year-old based on his development. And then also the 7-year-old will be entering a combined K/1 class this fall. The schools indicated that if there are behaviors that interfere with the class dynamics, that the placement will no longer be available. The child does exhibit challenging behavior, and so the clinical team is concerned that the behavior may present itself in school and lead to a loss of placement. So we do have one preventative strategy in place, which would be the technicians will actually go into the school with the child. The child will begin attending half days, so from 7:30 to 12:30, and the VT will provide support in the school. With success, of course, the technician will fade that support away. In addition to the educational setting, would also love to discuss some of the barriers in getting the family involvement. As you can imagine, this is a very busy household, and that has resulted in difficulty getting the parents involved in treatment. So the team has attempted to make multiple modifications in terms of the way we meet with the family and creating different creative opportunities to really meet the parents where they're at. So the clinician has offered to meet the mother on Saturdays when the father is home as well, so that he can help support with childcare and she can meet with the mom. The mom has declined this opportunity. We've started doing team meetings on Saturdays, which has been really helpful in being able to create opportunities for live in the moment training, but it still has been difficult to keep the parents engaged. So I believe that are all the items we wanted to discuss. And then I think lastly, we were discussing yesterday that would love also some recommendations on how to talk with the family about the future. Specifically, the mother has made comments that she believes the autism diagnosis will be dropped, and just trying to look for a compassionate way to help educate the family and talk with them about the potential. If the child were to be reevaluated, the child would likely receive that autism diagnosis again. And so how do we talk with the family about the future?
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to briefly summarize the case, and Farah and Denise, if you would like to add anything at this time, please feel free to do so. But we have a case that is brought for consultation today. It's a family that has 2 children with a third that just received a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. Children are 5 and 7 years old respectively. The family has several treatment barriers that have currently been identified that include safety concerns for not only the children that we're currently serving, but potentially for the children that are also living in the home as well. A report has been made to Child Protective Services, and the family has at this time opted to continue with treatment. So services have continued. The case is brought for consultation for the areas of trying to identify additional opportunities for supporting the family, educating the family, and gaining their involvement with treatment, as well as being able to provide some additional support as the children transition from a home school into private school environment. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Farah or Denise, at this time?
I think you did a great job summarizing the case. Something I just want to mention is when we first started services, Dad was a little bit hesitant, and it took him a little bit to buy in and to be willing to participate just in talking with us about treatment. And, you know, eventually he kind of could see the progress being made, and he was seemed to be happy with services. But after the report was made with CPS, we also, I think, lost some of that rapport, and the family now I think is struggling a little bit with where they're at and where they're, where they're at with BCI as well. And we have to kind of develop some of that rapport again. And I think that's where it's been a little bit difficult recently to try to communicate with the family about some of these safety concerns and the potential for the future as well.
Great. Thank you so much for that additional information, Farah. Let's go ahead and now move on to questions, clarifying questions. I think that there's probably going to be quite a few, and we'll start off with questions from the audience. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask those now.
I had a quick question. Child Protective Services is working with the family. What support have they provided?
Excellent question. Would one of the two clinicians like to answer that question?
Sure, I can answer that. We don't know what they're providing. The caseworker visited the home last week, and I have reached out to that caseworker, but we are not sure at this point what they've recommended or what services they've put in place for the family, and the family hasn't shared that information with us. So that's something that we're not really sure about at this point.
Did I hear correctly that this family, that the father is in the armed services? And if so, I know that the local base here has services for, like respite services for families who have children with disabilities. And I just wondered if that's been a part of trying to coordinate all of this.
Great question.
I have recommended respite services, but it hasn't really been.
It's okay.
I guess when I recommend it, it doesn't seem like the family recognizes the need or the benefit that it would provide. So it is something that I'm going to represent. So that's good to know that they have that through the Air Force, I guess, as a service that I can maybe bringing that aspect into the conversation would make them more interested, but they just haven't. I'm not sure that they recognize that could be beneficial or that they need that service, but respite services have been recommended.
So this is Lisa with the parents reaching out, and I think that the sense that I'm getting is that you guys coming into the home might be the maximum amount of strangers, even if they know you guys, that they might be able to kind of endure. I think that professionals kind of sometimes take for granted how violating it is to have people that you don't know coming in and out of your home on a regular basis. And so I think that, the children coming out of the home and going into the school and doing some of this work out of the home might help alleviate that. The other issue is the fear of strangers, and especially when you have a child that's going to behave in kind of non-traditional ways, the fear of the likelihood of them being abused or mistreated and then not being able to communicate with you is higher. So one of the ways that we kind of sell respite or personal care services is another option. If the kiddos are on Medicaid at all, they can get personal care services in Albuquerque. That's through Heritage Home Healthcare. But one of the ways we sell it is we ask them if they have any family member or family friend who's over the age of 18. And then that would address the 16-year-old issue because they do have to be 18, but they can go and be trained to do the care providing, so it doesn't have to be a stranger. And so they might not do it right off the bat, but then as they are kind of in the community and interacting with people, it might take them a year, but then they might meet somebody, if it's on the base, another mother who stays home with her kiddos, seems to do well with these kiddos or with some of the kiddos, and then they can go back and say, hey, by the way, I have this 16 hours of personal care services and this 100 hours of respite per year. Would you be interested? I could pay you, and and then the kids could be alongside your kids and be involved in the community. That might be a way to approach that sort of thing. But I know that when my child who has special needs was in early intervention and we had 8 to 10 therapies per week, I actually opted to take my kid and put her into school at the School for the Blind when she was 2 and 2 months, because for me, the stress of having people in my home, even though my home wasn't particularly dirty or it wasn't particularly wild, it just caused me a huge amount of anxiety and discomfort. So, and I really wanted my home to be my home, and not a therapy place that reminded me of my child's limitations on a regular basis. So,
yeah, I think that that's a wonderful recommendation and exactly the type of suggestions that our clinicians are looking for with respect to how to approach and identify a solution and have that conversation in a way that will make the family feel a little bit more comfortable as well. So I think that that's a wonderful suggestion. Thank you, Lisa. Do we have any other specific questions from the audience at this time? And then we'll move into recommendations right at the very end as well.
I guess this is Lisa. I'd also like to know kind of, is this just a family that's here? What are their supports? Do they belong to a church? Do they have like a care coordinator, or are you guys it? And then maybe at some point, children CYFD is going to come in and be involved. But what does the support system look like right now?
Excellent.
The family is not originally from New Mexico, so they don't have immediate family or close family nearby. So there's not that support system. They are a part of a church community. And I know they have had some play dates, but things like that are not frequent within their daily routine or anything like that. So they don't have a lot of local supports here. I think just one of the issues that we've seen, trying to suggest these additional supports or, getting them involved with other individuals that could potentially support them and help them through all of these transitions and different things that are going on, has been that they're not really always recognizing that they need that additional support. Like mentioning, when mom mentioned something to us, she's very casual about it and seems to not always recognize how dangerous or concerning some of the things that have happened could be. So when we're discussing with her, maybe we could do this, or, you could get support in this way, she's not always on board because I don't know if perhaps she doesn't want to portray to us how serious it is, or if she's just not fully aware of how concerning some of the issues are.
Great. Thank you so much, Farah. So I think what we're going to do is also move to questions from our panelists, and then we'll circle back to the audience participants as well. And I just would like to welcome Lynn from Mosaic Vietnam. I see that she just joined as well. And for the folks that are joining us from Mosaic, wanted to give you a reminder that the core theme, learning theme of the Echo Autism Clinic is how to coordinate services across providers, address treatment barriers for our families as well. And so our case presentation is surrounding that core theme today. So let's go ahead and start with our parent panelist, Sarah Baca. Do you have any clarifying questions for our case presenters today?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to unmute myself. I was just curious about the respite situation and if they had access to that, and you already answered that question. And then I guess the knowing what CPS had recommended to them, I'm curious to see as it progresses if they how they make recommendations and what they ask the family to do, how their demeanor will be with BCI. Hopefully it'll continue to be positive, and then maybe they'll really then realize, okay, they're right, and things will get better. So not really any clarifying questions, I guess, since you already answered them, but thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And Zoe, do you have any clarifying questions at this time?
I can unmute myself, yes.
Sorry, I'm dropping the ball on the muting today. Sorry.
think I've been doing this for a little while and I could figure that out, but there it is. I'm Zoe Miguel. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and so sometimes I ask questions from a little bit different perspective from from the BCBAs, although sometimes it's exactly the same. So the questions that I have are, I wondered if a release of information was signed with Child Protective Services, and also if the neglect or abuse was substantiated.
A release of information has not been signed. I haven't even thought of that, honestly. I didn't know we needed to do that, or that we, that hasn't even crossed my mind.
Okay, great.
And then, what was your second question?
Whether neglect or
abuse
had been
we don't know that. We haven't really gotten any report back. The only thing we've gotten back from Child Protective Services is a letter from one of, I guess, multiple people called on the incident, and so we have gotten a letter back from one of the callers that in the letter states that there wasn't an investigation, but that was, they said that was going to happen because there was already one going on. So we do know that it was investigated, but that's all we really know at this point from Child Protective Services. They have not given us any additional information regarding the investigation. So we do know there's an investigation going, but we don't know anything beyond that.
Okay. And then the next question is, I wondered if mom had been assessed for any mental health concerns. I asked that because I wonder about having a 2.5-year-old and a number of kids under the age of 7. I worry about something like postpartum depression or depression, and so I just wondered if there had been any if there was any information, or if mom was seeing her doctor or anything like that.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And do you know why the kids are being homeschooled?
There was and Farah, you might be able to give more details of this. I know that they had a bad incident with the oldest boy, who's now 8, when he was younger, in a different state. And so I think that, say that again, Zoe.
Do you know what that incident was?
So I don't have a lot
Farah,
of.
do you know?
I don't have a lot of details on it. I know it was related to the IEP, and I believe they started school, and the older boy said something at school that was alarming to teachers, and there was an investigation. And then I think there was an IEP process that was very difficult for the family, and things were suggested or put into place that the family was not comfortable with or did not want to participate in. So they then opted that it would be best for their family to just homeschool, so they would have better control over their education and the environment and things that they wanted them to participate in and things like that.
Great. And a follow-up actually on that leads great into my next question, which is, have they had any support around the IEP process in terms of their rights and their children's rights, and sort of how they can be empowered through that process?
I've spoken with mom about, when she mentioned going to school, I said, I think that'd be a great thing. We would be more than willing to help you with the IEP process and, give you any support that you would need or want. And she just really expressed that she didn't want an IEP at all. And so they were going to be looking into the private school to avoid that. But we did mention to her, that we would be willing to help her and any way that we could with that process. But she just seems very resistant and would rather forego that altogether.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much for that information. That helps a lot.
Great. Thank you, Zoe. Dr. Goldsmith, would you like to move on to the next clarifying questions?
Am I muted? There we go.
Did you?
Perfect. So great questions that have been asked so far. Again, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and also a behavior analyst, and I really appreciate, Zoe, you asking the questions about the parents' mental health status. I had the same question. You know, we always believe that parents want to do the right thing for their kids, and sometimes your own mental health can get in the way of that, and they've got a lot of stressors and they're dealing with a lot of stuff. And so I think the questions about how they're doing, how they're functioning, and what resources they have available to them to offer support, to put them in the best place, to take care of themselves so they can take care of their kids. Those are all great questions. Sort of sticking with that theme, one of the other things that you had mentioned was that there was I think a possibility of a diagnostic reevaluation, and that, you know, if the child were to be reevaluated, you believe that the diagnosis would maintain, or, you know, it would be the same outcome. I'm wondering, again, if there's something specific that's scheduled, and if there's been any collaborative partnership between you, the behavior analytics service provider, and the diagnostic entity, such that when the time comes, you're able to just work in partnership to support the family around acceptance of the diagnosis and better understanding what that might mean for now and for the future.
Yeah, so the family has mentioned several times that they want the diagnosis taken off as soon as possible. The older boy did get reevaluated this past year, and the family came to us, you know, wanted some information from us that we could give to the diagnostician. We happily obliged, gave them everything that we could, and we also filled out some surveys and some indirect assessment kind of things for them, so they could evaluate that during the assessment. They did not remove the diagnosis, and it was held up. And since then, they have still mentioned, you know, several times, oh, you know, next time we go back, then we'll get it removed. So my concern with that is, if it doesn't happen, you know, how do we start to prepare them for the future? You know, it might look a little bit different than what they're thinking it is, and helping them maybe come to terms with what their child's life could look like, and what, you know, what we could do to help them to support them with coming to terms with some of those things if it doesn't ever get taken off.
Right, great. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
I'll add also that when we started services, as Farah mentioned, the dad was very resistant. There was a feeling at the beginning when we started with the oldest child that we are working with, who's now 7, that he was going to outgrow this. And part of that comes from the father having some language delay when he was younger, and he had speech therapy, and he hated it and did not think it was beneficial, and felt like he outgrew whatever that was. So that's part of it. You know, going back to one of your statements, I would like any recommendations on how to approach the parents about you know, making sure that they're healthy, both physically, mentally. Like, how do you approach, you know, whether it's recommending, you know, or counseling or addressing that, because it is a family that, like we've mentioned, you know, they are resistant to any thought, even their children, of having a disability, a long-term disability, and not, you know, again, not affecting our relationship with them, not offending them in some way. And so I think that's one of those sticky issues that that is difficult to approach them on in terms of, you know, their own mental health.
Yes, agree. Those are hard conversations to have. So hopefully when we get to the RECs, we'll be able to talk about that a little bit.
Yes, excellent. And I definitely expect that we'll be getting a lot of great recommendations around those conversations, and we're looking forward to that. Kathleen, do you have any other clarifying questions?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay, great. Denise, I wanted to ask, first of all, I think that you all have done an amazing job, and it's clear that you have really developed a great rapport with the family because they have opted to continue care. And I know that one of the concerns was whether they were going to discontinue. And so I was hoping you could share with the group, because this is something that I know other behavior analysts have encountered, is that conversation of did you inform the family when you made the report, and if so, how did you approach that conversation? Because clearly it was successful, because they have continued, and I was hoping you could describe that a little bit for the team.
Sure. So I contacted Mom immediately the same day that we called. The initial call was made to Child Protective Services, and the message that I had was that out of respect for our relationship, we wanted to let her know in advance. We didn't want somebody to show up at the door and then her to wonder who made that report. I also communicated to her during this was a very short conversation with Mom, and she didn't say anything for several minutes, but I said, that we really had no choice, because the incident that we first called Child Protective Services on was the 5-year-old being outside of the home without any clothes on, and had gone down the street at least 5 houses. And the parent was not aware until the therapist arrived and saw the dog outside. So, and then that alarm, and then that cued Mom. The therapist didn't even see the child, so the child was definitely a ways from the home, because that, the therapist didn't see the client. So, so when that initial call did not go well. The mom basically said we should have minded our own business and hung up the phone on me, which I had kind of expected. Like, I just knew that it was going to be it was not going to go well. And then about an hour later, I got a call from the father, who has never called me. I mean, obviously we talked in the home and on different occasions, but he's never called me. He called and was very calm and said that he was calling to get more information, that his wife was very upset, and he was calling just to try to understand the situation. So I explained to him the same thing I had explained to her in terms of, our legal obligation in a situation like this to report, and that, we were obviously very concerned about the child, but that we wanted to support the family. So I spent a lot of time explaining to him that while we, we are the ones that made the report, that we were wanting to do anything we could to support them through this and to help them come up with solutions so that their children were safe. And, I tried to provide statements that indicated that we were not blaming them. We were not, he actually asked me directly what we were, number one, were we going to support them in terms of telling the Child Protective Services that they were good parents, or were we going to tell them they were bad parents? And so he also came out and directly asked me, do you think that we're bad parents? And I tried to work around that in terms of saying we're not trying to make any judgment on you. We're trying to help you. We're trying to support you, because you have, your wife has a lot of responsibilities. This many children at home, and then 2 of them with autism diagnosis disorders, would be really a lot of responsibility for anyone to be able to manage, and make sure that everyone is safe at every point, in time during the day. And so I also, something else I think was important when I talked to Dad was explaining that, excuse me 1 minute, until my son to turn down his iPad.
one of the wonderful things about ECHO is that you can do this from home. And we thank our team for helping co-present to allow Denise to be here today.
So one of the other things I think was important was, there was a statement made that the mom was really upset at the therapist that showed up when the incident happened, and that he wasn't sure that the mom was going to be okay with her coming back to the house. And one thing that I said which was completely honest and true, was that it was more of a process that happened that resulted in the call than her calling directly. And certainly she could have, but that isn't the way it happened. It was, it went through our internal process first, and then it was BCI as a team and as the administration kind of, making that decision instead of it being the clinician, the therapist that was on site. And I asked him, explain that to your wife, that it's how our process works, that we have an internal policy that any kind of incident, mild to severe, is reported, and that this would have been reported through our internal process, regardless of whether we would have called Child Protective Services. And I think that also wasn't made a difference in their mind in terms of it not just being that therapist, and that therapist is still working with the family. So I think that definitely helped with that relationship, and for that therapist to be trusted. I think there was definitely the trust issue between that therapist and the mom, and I think that helped alleviate that concern. So I talked to the dad for an hour that day, and we basically came to the conclusion that he would try to work in talking with his wife to understand the situation. He said, "I understand it. I don't agree with it. I don't like it. But I understand why you felt you had to make that call, and I will try to talk with my wife to help her understand, and then we'll get back to you regarding whether we're going to continue services or not."
Wonderful. Thank you so much for describing the conversation and how you approached the family to be open and transparent, but also coming from a compassionate approach of wanting to support the family. So I think that's really helpful for other clinicians who might encounter a similar situation as well. So thank you, Denise. And Lisa, I see that you have your hand raised. Thank you so much for doing that. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if either of these kiddos might be waiver eligible at some point, and if you've talked to the family about what long-term plans are as far as healthcare financing goes for these guys, because that can really incentivize at least an IEP to get them the documentation they'll need to get that, or even looking at where they're planning on going next. That might be a way to kind of win some of their confidence in that you're helping them think ahead and secure information about the next state's waiver in that process.
That's a great question, and I have not. I think that the primary care physician has discussed the waiver with them. Because the mom has shared in one conversation I heard had with her, she had mentioned the waiver, but I have to be honest, I have not circled back around to that, and that's a great recommendation. I think that I should do that and make sure that that they have signed up to be on the waiting list, because I know it's a very long waiting list for that.
Well, and you know, and I know we're going to do this in recommendations, but I think what might be beneficial for people that work with kids with autism is they're being rejected in huge numbers. We're getting about 4 or 5 calls per week from all over the state that they're even being kicked off of the wait list because the standards for autism to be eligible for the DD waiver wait list have changed. It used to be for Social Security and for the waivers that autism was almost a slam dunk, but that's not the case anymore. They're requiring pretty rigorous documentation of those 3 activities of daily living, and they have to be severe functional limitations. And they're really just not getting those types of documentations in outpatient settings. So the IEPs in particular are really, really important. Even if they're homeschooled, the school systems, the school districts are responsible to do testing and do those sort of educational reports. So that might be helpful also and kind of alleviate some of the burden. And that some of these outpatient physicians, these private neuropsychologists and doctors that are doing this testing, they're writing the reports in ways that they're practically useless. And so, and then they're refusing to rewrite them. So those are all things that could be maybe, you know, helping you to build a relationship that you actually are not just attacking and picking apart and putting them on the defensive, but actually looking at ways to strategize and get them set up.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that that's a great resource or a suggestion to be able to continue to identify resources in ways that can be supportive for the family as well. So I think what we will do is move on formally to our recommendations, and what I'd like to do is ask anybody in the audience that has recommendations, please include those in the chat box for now as well, because what we do is we add those to the written recommendations at the end of the clinic, and then if we have additional time at the end, we will read through all of those together, and then you'll also of course receive them in writing as well. So what I'd love to do is actually start, because I think that the parent perspective has been really valuable, and Lisa, I really appreciate your feedback in this clinic today, and I thought this would be a wonderful presentation that you joined, is also to get Sarah Baca's perspective as well on, you know, how this could be approached with the family so that, you know, it is, you know, hopefully rebuilding the relationship and strengthening re-strengthening the relationship as well. So if you have any recommendations around that piece or anything else as well, please feel free to share those with us now.
Alrighty. You know, as I had a little bit more time to think about it, I was just, I'm concerned for the mom, mostly because she stays at home. She has all of her children to care for, and I know sometimes, you know, whenever your husband is the one that's bringing in all the income and he's out there working and he's, you know, you kind of get that guilt. And so I'm hoping that the mom will take care of herself. I don't know if she, you know, goes to the gym or can find time to go to the gym, but maybe she can get some respite. And maybe that can be a suggestion to her, is to go find a dance class, a Zumba, something that can give her some her time. Maybe, you know, if she needs another mom to talk to, I'm here to talk to her, you know, meet her for coffee, something. So I think that I'm worried for her because maybe she just kind of feels intimidated and is afraid to say something because then, you know, that could lead to, you know, more marriage stress, and her husband is the primary, you know, brings in the money, and she could be afraid to say something. So I hope that is something that's looked at. And again, if she needs, you know, another mom to talk to or some, you know, something, I'd be happy to be that person for her.
Thank you, Sarah. You know, we actually discussed that we wanted to see if there was a way to connect her with you, because we thought that would be an excellent way to try to connect her with some additional supports. And I'm going to also ask a question. I do believe that in conversations with the clinical team that we have approached the subject of parent support groups and other community supports, and I believe that the feedback that we're receiving is that they feel like they have the support that they need. And so if there's any other recommendations, I think that was one of the pieces that they had put on their case presentation form about, and Lisa, this might be great too for your perspective, you know, for a family that maybe doesn't feel like they need to, that would be beneficial, let's say. What would be some gentle nudges or low response effort ways to, you know, help try to connect them to things that they might then find out are beneficial down the road?
So, well, that's one of the things I was trying to problem solve on. I mean, the waiver could, and there are different options. That's why I was kind of checking in on what the insurance situation is. I should have asked that before, but do we know if these kids are on Centennial Care, or are they just on the military insurance? Have they tried to apply for the Centennial Care, though?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, because with the one household income, even if he's military and their ages, the expansion, they may qualify for Medicaid as secondary. And under the Centennial Care, that's where they can get that personal care service. So it doesn't replace the mom, but it's somebody who can come in and perform like housekeeping, and that might be something that relieves some of the pressures from her. They call it personal care services. It's designed to relieve or to enhance the life of the kid with the disability. But like how I use it is like when, you know, whenever I try to cook dinner, my kids try to murder each other, and you know, the dog has an accident, you know, and then somebody calls with a crisis. I mean, that's what happens. And so when I have really high stress periods of time where my supervision skills go down or things like that, I have a person that just comes in and just kind of helps me literally put out fires or referee or whatever. And that's how, and that can be up to 40 hours per week, depending on the severity of the child's condition. I get about 16 hours a week, and I use it off and on. Like usually during the school year, homework time is just like, you know, the worst. I hated homework time when I was a kid, so I'm not into it. But that might be one option. The long-term services, once they get a care coordinator, can do things like purchase them memberships to like local museums. I think you guys are in the southeast region of the state. Is that correct?
We're kind of central, so we're yeah.
Oh, okay. So then there's a lot of like other activities that can be done. They can give memberships, because I think one of the things is to get the family into the community with supports, though, and just to start reducing that isolation. Support groups are not for everybody. I myself do not do well with support groups. They just really, really stress me out, and typically I can only handle one other mom with kids with special needs, because that's just kind of my style. So, and what we found is that families need to be told about us about 5 times, and we typically just get them when they're in crisis and they hit the wall. So repetition strengthens and confirms. So just each time bringing up different aspects, because the thing to remember is the sheer volume of relationships that having a child with special needs brings you into, right? It's like we think we're going to have our little kids and we're going to have our little family and we're going to just go do that. And all of a sudden now we have all of these other people that we have to get along with, that we have to make nice with, and that might have different values on child rearing. You know, because I was just thinking yesterday that, do you remember like when we were kids, we used to drink from hoses and like eat water balloons and stuff like that? I mean, I did, and it was just what you did. And now we worry about diseases because we know more, but that doesn't necessarily have transferred culturally to everybody. Because my kids were drinking out of the hose. My neighbors are physicians, and their kids came over and lectured my kids about how, you know, they were going to get like stomach parasites or something. And you know, I appreciated at that point, and I'm safe with all of them, but that could have been a pretty devastating kind of experience. So I think just kind of also picking your battles with the families too, because there's a lot going on, and kind of prioritizing and working with the really massive stuff would probably be the best benefits.
Yeah, I think the recommendations too about parent support groups not being something that's a good fit for every family is a great point, and having other opportunities. So Dr. Copeland, you had put in a recommendation for them connecting with the homeschool organization, and I think that that's a really great recommendation as well, to connect them to other families in the area. So thank you for putting that in there. All right, so Sarah, thank you so much for your perspective, and I'd love to pass it on to Zoe.
If it's okay, Joy, if I can actually maybe, I'm just wondering if looking at the psychological piece might be helpful to folks at this point.
You want Dr. Goldsmith to go next?
Yeah, I'm wondering if I can pass it on to one of the other panelists, and then I'll go. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. Okay. Dr. Goldsmith, we would love to hear your perspective on that piece and any other piece that you have as well.
Yes, and I'm sure, and I appreciate Zoe's input, so I think she's going to have lots of great stuff to add to what I was going to say. I mean, I think it's hard to give specific advice about how to have such a crucial conversation with a parent, because every parent and family is different, which I think, Lisa has beautifully articulated. So there are no givens, right? This is how it's going to occur, and this is what's going to ensure that it goes well. I think it's a lot about what you already know, right? The person who should have those kinds of conversations should be the person on the team who has the greatest rapport with the family. And that may be the supervising clinician, or it may not be. And so I think part of it is figuring out who the right primary communicator is around that piece with the family. And again, specifically talking about if mom needs more than what she has, how to get it and have those conversations. And Denise, I really appreciated what you said about that conversation with the dad, and I think what I heard that you did with him that was probably pretty powerful was just to validate, right, that you validated what he was bringing to the table about the difficulties. And I think the same goes for mom. I think, any little opportunities that you have to validate what's hard and what's challenging and what's a real struggle, and that it's not about her, but just that this other thing is hard, right? It's not about her failures or her limitations or her inadequacies, but just any parent, anywhere, under any circumstances, would find these things to be challenging and hard. And so I think trying in little ways, not like you need at 9:00 a.m. on a Monday morning to have this conversation, but in little moments, I like Joy's phrase, sort of gentle nudges to this. I think that's really the strategy when you have a parent that maybe has a few walls up and is feeling a little defensive, rightly so, right? There's a CPS investigation. But just find little ways to give those little moments of validation and gentle nudges about how this is a really typical thing. I think the other thing is, and I think Lisa spoke to this to some degree, but trying to figure out what is really the right fit between resources and what they need. And I think in some ways just asking them, right, that what are you really struggling with, and what's feeling really hard, and how can I help you with the things that you're finding hard, and what kinds of things do you think would make this feel less hard, right? Because her answers may be very different from your answers, but it may give you great insight into how to have that conversation and how to then present options that don't feel like they're constantly missing the mark. Because I think, as Lisa said, sometimes it takes 5 or 6 times to mention a resource, but I think the more you can narrow the focus of the resources that you suggest, then the more you can sort of work on the repetition factor versus saying, this is an option, this is an option, this is an option, right? Because there's 20 different ways that this family may be able to find what they need for that emotional support. So I don't know. I think those were just some of the things that were coming up, but it feels like you're trying. I think what's hard also is that is the timing, right? Because if this conversation was happening about exploring ways to provide resource and support to offset any mental health issues for the mom had happened 6 months ago versus right now in the midst of a CPS issue, it could be very different and feel very different. And so I think the timing is probably making this feel like a bigger, harder critical conversation to have. So so I don't know if that's helpful. And just to kind of shift gears for a second, and then I'd love to throw it back to Zoe to get her additional perspective on that. But just with the diagnostic piece, I think that's a tricky one too. And I, you know, to some degree, I feel like it's okay, right? If a parent doesn't know if this diagnosis is going to stick or not, I think it's reasonable for them to be asking those questions, and it's super typical for parents to be thinking that. I think a couple of points on that. One, I would just continue to, you know, deliver home the message that regardless of this kid's diagnosis, whether it's autism or intellectual disability or nothing, that this kid needs some help right now, and that's what we're here to do, right? And so if the diagnosis changes, so be it, but this kid really needs our support, and let's make sure that we do everything we can now such that over time, you know, supports may be reduced or look differently. And so I would kind of work that angle in the context of therapeutic service delivery. And the other angle I would work is that if, you know, if they really do have questions about a kiddo's diagnosis, just to encourage them, you say, you know, I hear that you're saying this, and I wonder, does your diagnostician know that you have these questions, that the diagnostic partnership shouldn't end at the point that the report is sent. And if I were the psychologist rendering that diagnosis and I knew that I left a parent in a position where they weren't sure, I sure would want them to call me. And so I would just try to message that a little bit. You know, have you called Dr. Stones? Have you talked to them? I bet they'd love to talk to you a bit more, especially now that you've had time to think about this diagnosis and read through the report. I bet they'd love the chance to answer these questions for you. So just, you know, think about that potential pitch at a moment that might feel right. And then the last thing I'm going to just throw in there, and I forgot to ask a question about it, so my apologies. It's just that, you know, what I have, so I'm now wearing my behavior analyst hat, right, that we've had concerns about elopement and wandering and, you know, the furniture fall. And all these things are obviously within the scope of our therapeutic treatment. And so I may have missed this in the beginning, but sort of the question and depending on the answer recommendation would be that if not already within the treatment plan, let's just get it in there, right? This isn't about, and I think it's another opportunity to explore, this isn't about good parenting or bad parenting. Any kid with any diagnosis that's having these issues would have support pieces in place within their plan. And if it's just there in black and white in a kind of objective way, it sort of takes out some of the judgment about those things. So things from securing furniture to the wall to alarms on the doors and all that jazz. And so it may be in your plan, but if not, again, just another angle to sort of work to take some of the parental judgment out. So anyway, that's what I got.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Goldsmith. I appreciate that input and perspective. Denise and Farah, did you guys have anything that you wanted to respond to or add to?
No, I love your recommendations. I think they're very helpful. I think because I'm in the home quite frequently that I'm the one that provides those gentle nudges when I see them. And sometimes, you know, we're able to have a conversation and she seems really on board to maybe try something new and try an additional support. And then just as time goes on, I'm not really sure if she loses motivation or she looks into it and, you know, maybe gets hesitant, or she discusses it with her husband and they decide it's not the best plan. But it seems like anytime we've kind of been like, oh, that might be great. Yeah, I think that sounds awesome. You know, you should try that. You know, she had mentioned like a housekeeper coming in and, you know, I was like, oh, that would be great. You know, it would alleviate some of your stress. And then it just kind of fell by the wayside. So it's hard because we find those opportunities and we try to encourage her and give her all the support that we can. And then for whatever reason, it kind of just falls away. And it could just be that she's, you know, very busy. So maybe, I don't know if it's within our scope to, you know, then help her, you know, look up those things or, you know, give her some additional resources where she can find information about those particular things. Maybe that would be the next step.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. And I, you know, I think, again, kind of, you know, wearing my psychologist and behavior analytic hat, and I think you've got your behavior analytic hat on, about motivation, right? So if you get into one of those moments where she seems ready, right? She says she's, oh, you know, I really want a housekeeper, or I need this, then seize the moment, right? Like, you know, if she's ready, don't walk away from the conversation without a plan. And it doesn't have to, you know, don't force it, right? But just say that, you know, that's a great idea. Let's figure out how to make that happen. What can I do to help you? Can I get you some numbers? Can I make a call? Can I connect you with somebody? And I think just as with all things, if we're able to take the door when it's cracked open and just push it a little bit further and have a concrete plan and make it actionable and find ways that you can support that plan to alleviate any response effort would be great, right? And so, you know, let me get that number. I'm going to call you Tuesday, and then next week let's check in and see how it went, right? But I would, if the door is open, I wouldn't walk away from it without a plan, and it, you know, and a small, doable, highly supported plan, right? And to a plan to a degree that she creates herself, right? Not a plan imposed by somebody else, but what's doable to you? Do you think you could make that call tomorrow, or do you need a little more time? What's, you know, but that she's crafting her own plan, that she's thinking critically about becoming more successful in managing her own needs, right? Which is exactly what we want to do for our kids with autism. The work we do with our kids is not so different than the work that is needed in partnering with parents. So I think that was a great comment to add. Gave me some additional perspective in terms of what you're dealing with.
Thank you so much. Yes. I think where I've struggled just being a BT following up with that thing, you know, different resources is, you know, am I kind of stepping on the toes of my position there in the home? You know, am I just there to implement the programs, or is it okay for me to do those additional things? Or is it ethically all right for me to, you know, kind of help with some of those things that aren't directly related to services? So that's what I've been concerned with, is not blurring those lines for the family, and, you know, trying to maintain the professionalism at all times, and not come off more as like a friend or something like that. So I think that's where I've struggled, and that's an area that I could grow into, you know, present these resources and ideas and supports to the family in a professional way, and, you know, keep it strictly about therapy, but, you know, supporting the family and also maintaining professionalism throughout.
Well, and I would just add, because that has been another concern with this mom, is keeping professional boundaries. So I would just add that perspective to what Farrah is saying, so that nobody thinks Farrah is being cold and
Yes, of course not. No, of course not.
That difficulty too, on the flip side, is that mom really wants to be friends with the therapist in ways that we've had to set professional boundaries. And so I think that's why she brought, I feel like that's that's important in understanding what she's saying too, as a therapist in the home, is, you know, that we've had to set some other boundaries with the mom, because she's wanted to do things that were kind of not appropriate at times.
Yeah, no, totally understand that. And I think everything that you guys have said today clearly indicates that you guys are on the right team, you're working in beautiful partnership, and that you're doing all the right stuff. It's just a really tricky situation. And I agree. I think when you, to balance being professional and supportive and ensuring that boundaries are maintained, it's a tricky thing. And I don't think there's a quick rec for that, right? It's just, you just got to get in there and do it. And I think you're doing it beautifully, you know, so yes, absolutely.
And I think that would be my role and my job to help, because we've had those boundary issues, is just making it less effortful for her to connect to resources when we have talked about them, and then following up. And so I was typing all of your recommendations down when you were talking, but yes, I think that's what she needs. I mean, I'm a mom with 2 toddlers, and so I do have some, you know, and I think that also helps with our relationship, that I am able to say, you know, I understand a little bit of what you're dealing with, because you know, I have my own 2 toddlers that require a lot of attention. So I do, you know, I have wanted to support her because I know I can't imagine having the responsibilities that she has, and then and then having people in your home all day long. I mean, there's therapists in her home every day, all day long. So it's a very challenging situation, and would be for any parent.
Yeah, so this is Lisa, if I can just add in there, and it might just be, and I think we've alluded to that, I mean, at a certain point, and I don't know if this has happened for the family, we need to talk to them about getting out of the medical model, because it's deficit-based, and it starts to tell you, like, that the more therapies you get, the better off your kid is going to be. And so perhaps she's investing this time and buckling down in the hopes that her kid is not going to have autism in the future. And I think, you know, denial is a really important part of parenting a child with special needs, and we definitely don't want to erode at that. But starting to kind of have conversations about, you know, what the future can look like, and dreaming and leisure activities. And do we have to do all of these therapies, or can one of the therapeutic activities be to like run in the sprinklers, or, you know, find some new fun thing for just a few minutes, something like that? Because when you're parenting children with special needs, you can get really kind of stuck in that medical model and forget that you're mom and there's like living to be done and there's all this kind of stuff beyond the therapies. And so that might be a beneficial conversation to, you know, just to kind of alleviate that it's not all just medical too. I don't know if that makes sense.
So I'm going to see if I can sort of bring together a couple of things. I think everybody's suggestions have been really wonderful, and I second them. I think one of the challenges in terms of servicing families, particularly in homes, is, and I think this is a good example, is that where's that line between a family's culture, right? Every parent is different. Every family has a different way of being in the world. And really, where does that cross into an environment being unsafe for a child? And so I think it sounds like that's one of the challenges that's happening for the team that's in there right now, is sort of where are those lines? And so I think that one of the things that might be helpful, again, is clarifying what that role of Child Protective Services is. And it really is their job to decide whether that environment is safe or unsafe, right? It's not our job. It's our job to report. It's not our job to decide what needs to be done, whether there's neglect or abuse. And so I want to encourage the team to try, and so maybe it's calling the CPS worker and saying, you know, I'm not sure if a release of information needs to be signed. Should I ask the family? You know, sort of, you know, I want to know how we can help, right? How can we support in this process? And sometimes what that does is that just brings the child's file up to the top because they know other people are involved and watching and want to be supportive. A lot of times caseworkers just, I mean, they have a stack. So I think that would be one of my main suggestions, was just really kind of in a very gentle way and supportive way, making sure that CPS is doing their job. And part of that job is a safety plan, and a lot of times they call it a safety and assessment plan for the family. It can be mandated or it can be voluntary. I think it sort of depends on the CPS worker and how concerned they are, but things like an assessment, a mental health assessment for mom, can be implemented and required in that plan. And so it takes, you know, and then the family can be upset with CPS, which, you know, generally everybody is, and not with the team. The team, the ABA team that's in there can continue to really take on that helping, supporting role. So that was one of my thoughts, was to really sort of connect with that CPS worker, find out how to collaborate with that person. The other one was about sort of connecting the family with supports that are more holistic, right? So that aren't necessarily group therapy or, you know, connecting with a provider. And the two that I thought of, one was, well, there are actually three. So the PRO obviously is great because she could get support around the IEP process. It's a parent-driven organization. So not only, so by connection, she's going to connect with other parents. And I think that the other parents might be much more or much less threatening because they can relate and there's that connection, right? So that might be nice. The other resource I wanted to just mention is the Exceptional Family Member Program. And so, and that's through the military. And sometimes military stuff just can get challenging, right? Just having a child with special needs. saying you need support, mental health issues, all of those can be very, very sticky within the military environment. And so connecting with other families who've negotiated that well, and that's really designed to support those families, I think might be really good. And again, a holistic, connection. And then obviously connecting with Sarah Baca and the Autism Society of New Mexico, I think would just be an extraordinary connection. So I think those were sort of the overarching things that I would recommend. I think that I do want to say that I know that long-term planning can be very helpful. I think that we have a family who's really in crisis. And just based on the things that have been said, I'm very concerned about the safety of these kids. Again, knowing very, very little. But the fact that multiple calls have been made to CPS, that the family moved because the child said something alarming. Again, I have no idea what that was. It could have been saying a bad word, right? I mean, everybody sort of has their, and that the family moved. So I'm concerned that this family is going to move again if things get too hot here in terms of, sort of feeling like their structure is being threatened. And DD waiver doesn't transfer to other states. So I just think questions or thoughts around those two specific pieces and really keeping in mind that this is a serious situation is helpful. So there we go. I know I just left 3 minutes for other folks. I apologize.
No, that was wonderful. And I think that it's wrapping everything up really nicely with respect to what has been recommended for the case today. And I would like to reiterate that the two clinicians on the team have just done a really wonderful job. And it's really great to see that, they've started on the path of a lot of these recommendations. And you two have put a lot of time and effort into taking care in your communication with the family so that you can maintain the relationship, and ultimately the goal is to be able to continue care for the two children that have been receiving services and have made some great progress with their technicians in the home. And so, I just want to definitely commend both of you for the time that you put into this. And I think that we're definitely on the right track. The report was only made maybe a week ago, I believe. And so, insofar as any additional information that is received, I know that Denise has reached out to the caseworker and has offered support. And, for anybody that's here too, would like to share that this is, something that's an uncomfortable conversation to have. It's a very difficult situation. A lot of people, it's one of the hardest conversations to have with a family. And so Denise, spending an hour with the family just shows how much you care. And I hope that by discussing the resources and how to approach the situation, because it takes time, and I think continued exposure to know how to approach these situations so that you can really reach the ultimate outcome, which is to be able to just help support the family. And I think it is pretty clear that the family is in need of some assistance, and the suggestions that came through are excellent. And so we're going to be putting all of those in the case recommendation forms, and knowing that these recommendations that come through have been used with other cases. I've heard from many clinicians, they've used these resources across ECHO clinics, and so we appreciate everything that people have put in there as well. So thank you all very much for that.